Republican Representatives Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz are joining the Free Britney movement in relation to Britney Spears and her conservatorship, and they have sent a letter to the chair of the Judicial Committee, Jerry Nadler, asking for more congressional oversight of the judiciary in relation to conservatorships. Okay, I know. Hold on. What are conservatorships? Who's Britney Spears? Why does this matter? Let's talk about it, okay? I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a legal and political commentator here on YouTube. If you like that type of content, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Okay, first thing, what's a conservatorship? A conservatorship is a legal relationship between a conservatee and a conservator. The conservator is appointed by the court to oversee the financial and personal affairs of the conservatee because the conservatee is deemed to be unable to manage those affairs. That's a basic overview. We'll get a little bit more into it in a minute. Who's Britney Spears? Britney Spears is the singer. Britney Spears, pop artist, a very, very popular pop icon through the early 2000s. And Britney Spears is probably also the highest profile conservatee in the public right now. Following her divorce from, I believe, Kevin Federline, she went through a very public mental breakdown, making places like TMZ millions of dollars covering her mental health crisis. She shaved her head. A whole bunch of other much more devastating things happened behind the scenes. And a court determined that Britney Spears was mentally unfit to take care of her own affairs. This was quite a while ago. Over a decade ago, I believe. The court determined she was unfit to manage her affairs, and so they appointed her father as conservator. Now, Britney Spears is an adult, and that's the important part of conservatorships, is that a conservatorship is put over an adult who is unable to manage their own affairs. And in some cases, there are very good reasons for this. For example, someone who has a mental disability, someone who has a traumatic brain injury, someone who is going through dementia or Alzheimer's and is no longer capable of making their affairs, someone who's dealing with crippling addiction problems may be in a similar boat, and a court may need to intervene to protect the person from their own decisions, to protect their estate, their financial situation from the ravages of their inability to make good choices. And Britney Spears may have at one time been at that point. In fact, despite being a highly successful pop icon, her estate was in debt at the time. And over the course of her conservatorship, it has grown to a value of approximately $60 million. So things have worked out. However, the interesting thing about Britney Spears is that by public accounts, she seems to be in a much different place than she was when this thing was created. However, when this thing was created, it was made permanent by the court, which means it will last until she dies or until she can convince a court to go against it. And she has been fighting various aspects of the conservatorship for quite a while now, and it's becoming increasingly more public. However, she has never petitioned the court to terminate the conservatorship in its entirety. And so we don't know the situation there, but what we can say is these are the facts about Britney Spears. This is why conservatorships are starting to get a lot of attention. And it's important to note that because of the relationship that is created and mandated legally by the court, conservatorships are ripe for something like abuse, financial exploitation, personal exploitation. Those types of things can be prevalent when someone is in full control of your decisions. Conservatorships extend beyond investment management. That's one thing, right? Like, oh, we're gonna take control of how your finances are invested and try to build something for you. That can all be done in various other ways through trusts or corporate interests and stuff like that. However, a conservatorship is more than that. It's a control over all of your financial decisions, over your decision to purchase a home, an automobile. You basically are depending on the conservatorship's terms, granted like an allowance, and you may not be able to make investments that you want to make. Importantly, you may not be able to change careers or do career actions that you want to do. because the conservator will have a say over those actions. And so it really is a huge restriction on what normal people would consider their personal liberty, their ability to make decisions about their lives and their work. And that's a huge, huge restriction. It should only be done with extreme caution. And there's a lot to indicate that it's not. And the reason that this is allowed to go on for so long is because most people don't deal with conservatorships in any normal sort of capacity. I mean, they might for an aging parent at the end of their life. And at that point, they might be appointed a conservator. So that's how they kind of get to see it from their side. But Britney Spears in particular has opened the eyes of America and really the entire world to this conservatorship issue. And while she's a special case because she's a celebrity who is worth millions and millions of dollars, there are thousands to millions of Americans out there who are in these conservatorships, who are not famous, who have varying levels of financial success, but are all potentially being exploited at any given moment by the conservator appointed by the court. And the courts are not doing enough to look into this. And the process for getting out of a conservatorship is very onerous on the conservatee. For example, in California, where Britney Spears is, if she wants to get out of that conservatorship, she has to pay for her legal fees to fight against it, which can be very, very expensive. You're talking about a 6 to even a 7-figure fight to get out of this conservatorship by, proving that it's no longer necessary for her. But she also has to pay for the conservator's legal fees. The person appointed over her is paid for by her. So if she wants to fight against the conservatorship appointed by the court, she has to pay her own money to fight against herself, and she has to pay that out of her own estate. And that is right there, in my opinion, that is already an abuse. But that's another question. I mean, there are reasons that you do this, because otherwise every conservatee would just fight constantly and force the conservator to pay more than it was worth. That's the idea behind it. However, it does leave a situation ripe for abuse. And maybe it's time to look into some safeguards. And that's what Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz are doing here. So let's take a look at some of the stuff they've got here. The House Committee on the Judiciary is charged with safeguarding the rights afforded to Americans by the U.S. Constitution. These rights include having the free will to guide one's own affairs and legal autonomy over one's finances. When situations suggest the unjust deprivation of those rights by the government, we have an obligation to conduct oversight and explore potential remedies. And this, we should all be able to agree that this is where we want Congress regulate the government actions. A court is stepping into someone's life and saying, you don't get to make your own decisions anymore. Someone else gets to. And Britney Spears hasn't talked about this a lot. I mean, there's a documentary on it. It's called Framing Britney Spears. You can go watch it if you want to. I don't really care if you do or not. She's been pretty quiet about the conservatorship publicly, typically only speaking through her attorney. But when she does talk about it, she talks about being restricted in her person, being restricted from having the basic freedom to make her own decisions, being told that the things that she cares about don't matter because it's not her decision to make anymore. And that is something that all Americans should be a little bit rankled by the idea of this. And that's how deprivations of liberty should work, right? We should recognize that on occasion, it's right to deprive someone of liberty. But that deprivation should cause us to shudder a little bit, because when we think of ourselves in that situation, we don't want to be there. That's how deprivation of liberty needs to work. We need to identify it as a wrong thing that has an occasional right use. Does that make sense? I hope so. In recent years, there's been growing public concern about the use of conservatorships to effectively deprive individuals of personal freedom at the behest of others through manipulation of the courts. And so this is part of it, right? Someone makes a petition to the court and says, this person's crazy. We need to take away their freedom. You need to put me in charge of their money. Little bit suspect. A project funded by the U.S. Department of Justice to examine conservator exploitation found that financial exploitation by conservators often goes unchecked by the courts, and there's a dire need for guardianship/conservatorship reform. Moreover, the ACLU recently voiced that conservatorship should be viewed with the skepticism and used as a last resort, but in most cases, it's done routinely and without substantive engagement. The ACLU is concerned that individuals are being stripped of virtually all of their civil rights through guardianships and conservatorships, and has called for the exploration of reforms to ensure that unnecessary conservatorships can be terminated so these individuals may direct their own lives. The most striking example is perhaps the case of multi-platinum performing artist Britney Spears. So they've got a summary here. Let's just finish up the letter because I think this is important stuff. Since 2008, Ms. Spears has been under a court-ordered conservatorship. The facts and circumstances giving rise to this arrangement remain in dispute, but involve questionable motives and legal tactics by her father and now conservator, Jamie Spears. In court appearances in August and November of 2020, Ms. Spears' attorney represented the court that Ms. Spears strongly opposed having her father as a conservator. She was afraid of her father and that she would not again perform publicly so long as this arrangement persisted. Despite these pleas, Ms. Spears remains a conservator of her estate, or Mr. Spears remains a conservator of her estate. Despite Mr. Spears' claiming to want nothing more than to see Ms. Spears not need a conservatorship, his attorney admitted in a recent documentary, "Of the cases I've been involved in, I've not seen a conservatee who has successfully terminated a conservatorship." And again, it's really, really hard to prove to the court that you're not crazy anymore. Right? It's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove a negative. And again, you have to fight against yourself. You have to spend your own money to fight against someone who's also spending your money to get access back to your money. Ms. Spears is not alone. There are countless other Americans unjustly stripped of their freedoms by others with little recourse. For example, Long Island resident Daniel Gross was forced against his will into a conservatorship after being hospitalized with cellulitis while visiting his daughter in Connecticut. In what the judge labeled as a terrible miscarriage of justice, Mr. Gross was locked in a Connecticut nursing home for 10 months despite his pleas for release. Given the constitutional freedoms at stake and opaqueness of these arrangements, it is incumbent upon our committee to convene a hearing to examine whether Americans are trapped unjustly in conservatorships. Let me just answer that for you. Of course they are. Of course they are. If something can be exploited, it is being exploited. The scary thing is we don't know how badly people are being exploited because their personal affairs are controlled by someone else, which strips them of autonomy, which strips them of agency, and it removes their ability to even speak out for themselves. The only reason we know about Britney Spears' conservatorship is because she's such a large public figure, and it is such, there's been such a dramatic change from where she was when she went in to now, and we still have seen the courts do nothing about it. So, I don't know. What do you guys think about conservatorships? I'm a little skeptical. I'm certainly never going to educate my kids on what they are. But tell me what you think down in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. And do you think we should free Britney? I think we should free Britney. I think it's been enough time, and she deserves a chance to manage her own affairs at least once again before she dies. But, you know, I'm old-fashioned. I believe in freedom. So until next time, have a good day. Peace. Peace.